estate is indeed in my family, has been in my family for now 215 years. It's a long time, but only 6 generations of family members running the estate over all these years. And the estate has this particularity to be really focused around Volnay. We only have 2 vineyards outside of the village of Volnay, one in Meursault-Centenot, Premier Cru, only a mile away from my home, and one small one in Pommard, which is even closer from home. And one of the things about it is that this really has created over all those generations, it has created a very special relationship between the village and the family. And really, whenever I talk about my wines, I always want to speak about the village first, because Volnay is a tiny village. It's very small in acreage terms. It's very small. There's only 110 hectares of Volnay Premier Cru overall for the entire village. To put that in perspective, this is the same size as Chateau Latour. Chateau Latour is owned by one person only, and the village of Volnay is spread amongst more than 40 different owners and wine growers. So it tells you a little bit about how fortunate I am that I can farm in Volnay more than 12 hectares of Volnay Premier Cru out of the 110 hectares. So I think the largest holder of Volnay Premier Cru overall, and it's been in my family, like I said, for all these generations. And it's a wonderful village. It's a very special village in the Côte de Beaune. You know, most people who come to try and understand Burgundy, they always have the tendency to simplify, which is understandable because Burgundy is complicated, but the simplification often says that the great red wines are from Côte de Nuit and the great white wines are from Côte de Beaune. And it is true, of course, there are some great wines in the Côte de Nuit and some great white wines in the Côte de Beaune, but in Côte de Beaune, there's also a fantastic village, and that's Volnay. It's fantastic because it has a diversity of terroirs, which is much bigger than its small acreage would lead to believe. And it has wonderful expositions to the sun, and it creates wines. It produces wines that are really what I think Burgundy brings to its best, which is very precise, clean, elegant wines that always come as a surprise. They always surprise you because they have a wonderful personality. You know, many people have thought about buying other things away from their own village in Côte de Nuit or further, you know. But in Burgundy, I only want to farm around my home. And so I want to stay focused on Volnay because I understand Volnay better than any other village of, and therefore it's very important to me that I continue to focus on that particular area, which I know well. So even if I had the opportunity to acquire things in Burgundy, I'm talking in Burgundy, away from Côte de Beaune, away from Volnay, I think I would have less interest, precisely because I'm a believer that there is a Volnay school of winemaking, and there is a school, there's a style in Volnay that I particularly like. I think it suits our domain well, the style of the village of Volnay. So I started with our Meursault-Centenot in 17, then we did the white Burgundies and Aligoté, and then we moved to the reds, which we harvested between the 6th and the 10th, roughly, of September. So overall, it's a vintage that I enjoy particularly. We can start tasting, maybe Thibaut, or
yes, I was about to say maybe we can start tasting, and while our guests try the wine, I was about to ask. 17 was generous, as you just said, but was it generous really, or compared to the other 5 smaller vintage, it looks more generous than it really was?
Yeah, it's from my own perspective, a nicely sized vintage is one where I make roughly 35 hectoliters per hectare. So call that 5,000 bottles per hectare, and that's approximately what we got in 17. So it's just somewhere around my sweet spot in terms of yields. Yeah.
I know you from previous discussion with you that you're working very hard on all your wine, but and also your aligoté. It's something that you have been getting behind to give it back his lettre de noblesse, if I could say something like this.
Yeah.
That's the one we're having now. Why do you like it so much? And is it what kind of aligoté are you using, if I may ask?
This is indigenous plantations, and what's important to know is that this vineyard in Aligoté is on the village of Volnay. It's down in the flatlands of Volnay, but it's on the village of Volnay, and it's a vineyard that we've owned also for a long time. But my father had given up this vineyard to a farmer who was farming the vineyard, and for us and for him. But I decided that I wanted to take it back because Aligoté is a grape that is only known really in Burgundy. It's a very Burgundy specific grape, and I thought it was important for Domaine d'Angerville to actually produce some Aligoté. Plus, it's a wine that I enjoy particularly. It's an unassuming wine. It's just it's a wine for thirst. It's a wine for pleasure, and it's an easygoing wine. But it can be made more or less well. But if you pay attention to it and you don't try to disguise an aligoté into something which it is not, then you have what aligoté brings you, which is this acidic tension, which is always very nice and goes particularly well with seafood, for example, but also as an aperitif, something like that. So I took the family vineyard back from the farmer that my father had rented it to, and then I acquired more and I replanted more aligoté next to my own vineyard. I was able to buy in 2018. I was able to buy a quarter of aligoté from my next door neighbor, which is always very nice. And previously I had replanted another piece. So we have now I think about 60 hours, 0.6 of a hectare of aligoté overall, and we've used massal selections and as well as existing clones to replant the new pieces. You were talking about in 17. Then we did the white burgundies and aligoté, and then we moved to the reds, which we harvested between the 6th and the 10th, roughly, of September. So overall, it's a vintage that I enjoy particularly. We can start tasting, maybe Thibaut, or
yes. I was about to say maybe we can start tasting, and while our guests try the wine, I was about to ask. 17 was generous, as you just said, but was it generous really, or compared to the other 5 smaller vintage, it looks more generous than it really was?
Yeah, it's from my own perspective, a nicely sized vintage is one where I make roughly 35 hectoliters per hectare. So call that 5,000 bottles per hectare, and that's approximately what we got in 17. So it's just somewhere around my sweet spot in terms of yields. Yeah.
I know you from previous discussion with you that you're working very hard on all your wine, but and also your aligoté. It's something that you have been getting behind to give it back his lettre de noblesse, if I could say something like this.
Yeah.
That's the one we're having now. Why do you like it so much? And is it what kind of aligoté are you using, if I may ask?
This is indigenous plantations, and you know what's important to know is that this vineyard in Aligoté is on the village of Volnay. It's down in the flatlands of Volnay, but it's on the village of Volnay, and it's a vineyard that we've owned also for a long time. But my father had given up this vineyard to a farmer who was farming the vineyard, and for us and for him. But I decided that I wanted to take it back because Aligoté is a grape that is only known really in Burgundy. It's a very Burgundy specific grape, and so I thought it was important for Domaine d'Angerville to actually produce some Aligoté. Plus, it's a wine that I enjoy particularly. You know, it's an unassuming wine. It's just it's a wine for thirst. It's a wine for pleasure, and it's an easygoing wine. But it can be made more or less well. But if you pay attention to it and you don't try to disguise an aligoté into something which it is not, then you have what aligoté brings you, which is this acidic tension, which is always very nice and goes particularly well with seafood, for example, but also as an aperitif, something like that. So I took the family vineyard back from the farmer that my father had rented it to, and then I acquired more and I replanted more aligoté next to my own vineyard. I was able to buy in 2018. I was able to buy a quarter of aligoté from my next door neighbor, which is always very nice. And previously I had replanted another piece. So we have now I think about 60 hours, 0.6 of a hectare of aligoté overall, and we've used massal selections and as well as existing clones to replant the new pieces.
You were talking about buying vineyards. We have a question from the group. To which I believe I know the answer. If you are buying any grape at all, or if everything is produced from the domain. I believe everything is produced from the domain.
Yes, you know, it's one of the which I'm always pleased when this question is asked, because it's really in my genes, so to say, that for me, a winemaker is a wine grower. And when we say in the French on the labels, we say propriétaire récoltant, it means owner, harvester. And it means something, you know, it means that I control every piece of work that is being done on the vineyard for every bottle of wine that I produce and distribute. And so therefore my ability to control could not be higher. So I'm responsible. If the wine is not good, it's my fault. If it is good, it's also to my credit. And it cannot be exactly the same thing when you buy grapes or when you buy juice. It can be wonderful. Some people have great arrangements, but of course, the battle is fierce to get the right grapes and to get the right juices. And frankly, it's not what I want to do. What I want to do, I think of myself as a farmer, as being a farmer first. And then the juice is in my cellars and I take care of the juices to make them into wine. But the work starts in the vineyard and I want to control. I want my own team to be working in the vineyard.
When it comes to red wine, you have perfect this idea whereby there is even a Pinot d'Angerville. You have put your name, a Pinot Noir d'Angerville. You have put your name on the grape. Can you tell us more about that?
It's a very old story, and it's not me personally, but it's my father and my grandfather. When there was that transmission between my grandfather and my father, and we're now talking 1951, the two of them decided that they wanted to select themselves selection so that they could be replanting their own vineyards with a Pinot Noir that they would particularly think would be particularly suitable for the kind of wine they wanted to make. And they started working on that, and it's a very long process because you have to look at vine per vine per vine per vine, and you have to look very intensely, attentively as to how this particular vine actually behaves and what kind of berries it produces and everything else. And over a series of years, these two gentlemen, my father and my grandfather, came to selecting some specific vines which they thought were particularly suitable, and they contributed those findings to the local co-owned lab and conservatory nursery of Burgundy, and it was named by these people Pinot d'Angerville because it referred to the fact that it had been selected and taken from the vineyards owned by the estate. So it's still conserved in the nursery in Beaune under the name Pinot d'Angerville, with very small berries, particularly fine and low producing Pinot Noir.
The work, I remember about a month ago, you spoke about Vintage 19 with the London team and then Singapore team, and I would listen to you. You mentioned having bought more Pinot Noir as well. The same job you're doing for the Aligoté, you're doing it for the Pinot Noir at the regional level, regional appellation. For the Chardonnay, that is the next wine we have in the lineup, and then maybe we could taste and talk about now. Have you done the same? Have you secured more vineyards recently to have a bit more bottles to sell to our eager sommelier who wants to show your wine in their restaurant?
Sadly, I have not been able to buy more Burgundy Chardonnay in my recent purchases. The last purchase I talked about, the most recent one I talked about is, like I said, it's just after the harvest of 2018 that I bought it. It was 1.25 hectares, of which 1/4 was Aligoté, and the rest was Pinot Noir, Burgundy Pinot Noir. But I'm still looking. I'm looking around, and also some of the pieces that I bought are quite old, and I'm considering maybe uprooting them and maybe replanting some of it in Chardonnay as well. But it's fine. I have some Burgundy Chardonnay that I'm happy with the volumes that I have so far. I could sell more, of course. I could do more, but I could buy more. But it's not bad what I have. I'm happy with it. It's also on the village of Volnay, by the way.
Yeah, I was about to ask. It's also on the village of Volnay. Yeah. The 17 that we're tasting now, Vintage 17 drinks well. I think the more it goes, the more we all realize that Burgundy makes wine that gain dimension with aging. At the moment, what other vintage do you think is drinking particularly well?
We have to make that call depending on the color, of course. So if we start with the red wines, in reds, the vintages that I think are really perfectly ripe now, and I will start no older than 2000, because otherwise it would be a very long list. But 2004, 2007, 2009, even 2011, 2014. These are vintages that are very enjoyable to drink now. I'm not saying they've reached their peak yet, but they're certainly getting there. 2004 and 2007, I think are definitely on a long plateau. It's unlikely that they would continue to improve a great deal, but they're on a long plateau, and they will be enjoyable for a long time still, but probably not improving a lot more from where they are now. 2009, for example, is hugely nice to drink now, enjoyable now, hugely enjoyable now, but I think there is more to come. I think there's more to come. It's a very beautiful vintage. It's a very clean, very elegant, a lot of breed in that, a lot of class in that particular vintage. And then 11 and 14, which I mentioned, Thibaut, you know me well, and you know that it's the style of vintage that I like. It's a vintage. These two vintages are not too exuberant. They're very, very clean. They're very Pinot Noir style, and that's the way I like Burgundy wines to be. So, saying that I think there is also something called school of winemaking that is dependent on the village where you're in. In other words, if I'm based in Volnay and I try to make a Pommard, my Pommard will not look Pommard style. It will have some Volnay style in it. And why is that? It's because winemaking is learned verbally very often. It used to be at least the case, a little less now because people go to universities and they also go to other places in the world where there's winemaking. But a lot of that traditional way of making wine is actually taught from one generation to the next. And the people in Volnay, they made wine in a certain way, and they told their sons and grandsons and great-grandsons how to make wine. And therefore, there is a school of winemaking in Volnay that is different from the one in Meursault or from the one in Pommard or the one in Allos-Corton. And that's very important to keep in mind, because in the question that you asked, you're saying, how do you compare yourselves with other winemakers in Volnay? Well, you know, we have differences, but we also are all looking for the same thing. We are looking to produce wines in Volnay that are elegant, feminine, clean, precise. We all strive for that, I think, generally speaking. Now, there are some differences in style. Some people extract a bit more than others. Some people will want to be more intervening than others. What I will say for ourselves in Volnay, Domaine Marquis d'Angerville in Volnay, is that we believe the wines are better when the human intervention is kept to a minimum. I've often referred to Alan Meadows one day describing my wines to me, and he said, Guillaume, your wines are not made, they are born. And you know, this is a best encapsulation of what I'm trying to do. I'm happy to have the role of a midwife and to help the wine be born, but then the wine grows and develops, and the élevage is what it is, and that's it. You know, my intervention is in the vineyard, and goes back to our earlier discussion. You cannot make a great wine if your vineyard is not properly kept. But then my intervention, let's keep it as limited as possible. You know, we take the berries, they come from the field, they're sorted, destemmed 100%, only the berries go into the vats. And then, you know, we try and brew the berries like we brew tea. Maybe that speaks to you all in Asia. I think of my vinification as a brewing exercise where I just recycle the juice so that there is that brewing going on all the time, but I don't punch down because I do not want to brutalize my berries. I do not want the seeds to be part of that particular exercise of brewing. I don't want unwanted tastes to come in by putting some stems with my berries. I just want juice, berries, and skins, and that's it to make the wine. and then leave the fermentation go on the way it wants to go on, and that's really it. The wine makes itself on its own.
Would you mind telling us a few words about the Frémier, and also where do you place it in your range of wine? As Tannins was asking earlier, you mentioned your collection of Premier Crus, and you started by Clos-des-Angles, finishing by Clos-des-Ducs. Is there a year for you in your wines?
Yeah, well, you know, the way when people visit in Volnay and they taste the entire range, the order is Clos-des-Angles, Frémier, Cailleray, Taillepied, Champon, and Clos-des-Ducs. And I do that for a reason. Sometimes I switch between Champon and Taillepied, depending on the vintage. But generally speaking, Frémier, I think, is on an upward trend. It is catching up with Cailleray, Champon, and Taillepied, frankly. Historically, I've put it a little bit down from those three, which I put on the same level. Champon, Cailleray, Taillepied, I put them roughly on the same level. Frémier slightly less, and Clos-des-Ducs way above. But Frémier has caught up. Frémier is, I make a much better Frémier than I made 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago. I think there's a combination of things there. You have to understand that Frémier is a very shallow soil. The terroir is a very shallow soil. There's only maybe 50 centimeters of soil before the mother rock. So it's always the most precocious vineyard. It's probably almost always the one we harvest first in reds. And it has that minerality at the back of the mouth because the vines go through the mother rock for quite a journey, and that brings the minerality back from the soil, from the mother rock, which is full of limestone. So it's a beautiful wine, Frémier. It's a wine that I enjoy very much, and I think it's very. Sometimes when I describe it, I say yin and yang, which I hope also speaks to you. I hope I use it in the proper way, this expression. But what I mean by that is that the original attack is very fruity, almost there is almost a sucrosity in the initial, in the beginning of the mouth, and yet the back is quite a salty finish often. And the salty finish is due to that minerality that I was talking about. And so this wine I love because of that. It takes you from sugary sucrosity to salty, almost iodic finish at the end of the mouth.
And then when we will taste the Champon afterwards, Champon it's completely different. It's a bigger, broader, more powerful wine.
See, I do get that salty finish on the edge of the tongue. I don't know if you felt the same, but it feels like almost like you've eaten an oyster and you've taken some seawater with it. It leaves you with a salty finish, which I think is very likable, and it's a no-brainer way to recognize the Frémier in the range. Champon, yes, is indeed quite different. It's on the other side of the village. It's on what we call the south hill of the village. You know, Volnay, the vineyards of Volnay are located on two small hills, and the village sits in between those two hills. And Frémier is on the northern hill facing east, and Champon is on the south hill also facing east. Champon is a larger terroir for us. It's the largest holding that we own. It's 4 hectares. Our holding is 4 hectares out of a total of 11 hectares for the appellation overall. So we are by far the largest holder. And it's a vineyard which is characteristic by its very long rows, where they start almost at the bottom of the hill, and they go past mid-hill. And of course, the soil is quite different at the top from what it is at the bottom, because of erosion and other things. But generally speaking, compared to Fremier that we just had, Champagne, the content of the soil of Champagne is more clay and more ferrous than Fremier. If you look at the soil in Fremier, it looks very whitish and very limestoney. In Champagne, especially at the bottom of Champagne, you have an impression of a very brown, very almost red soil.
Does it make for the wine to sustain easily a passing of time and make it a bit wine more equipped for longer aging, the Champagne, this soil, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, but Champagne, what's interesting about Champagne is that it's really, I would say in many ways, if you wanted to describe what Volnay Premier Cru is all about, you could use Champagne as an example. It's kind of the archetype of what Volnay Premier Cru is all about. You know, it's the most feminine of the range. It's all in curves. It's very silky, very velvety in style. Yet it's vibrant. You know, a lot of life in that particular wine, especially in 17. I haven't tasted it yet, but and you know, normally the tannins are very well integrated, very clean, beautiful fine tannins.
You mentioned wanting to be the midwife, so-called the midwife delivering the wine from the vineyard. Do you do any cold maceration for the grape? Do you destem? What is your secret in the cellar? Only what you can tell us.
Yeah. No, yeah. So, like I said, we do when the grapes come from the vineyard, we sort them. We have a sorting table, and then we do destem 100% of the harvest. Like I said earlier, we do not want any wood in our vats. We've tried in 2018. We made a small experiment because 18 was a very generous crop, as you probably know. We had enough wine to make a small experiment in Fremier, in fact, where we had a tiny vat where we put vendange entière without destemming, and we vinified it all the way to bottling separately. But we decided, we all agreed that we preferred the destemmed version. As for cold maceration, we do want a period of a few days before fermentation starts. So we want the berries to settle in the vat properly, cleanly, and then, so we will maintain temperature at a low enough level that fermentation will not start. But we will not freeze. We will not bring temperature down. We will just maintain it at around 12, 13 degrees, which is low enough that fermentation will not start. And then after 3-4 days, we let it go up, and then fermentation normally starts after 3-4 days of maceration, and that's more than enough.
For us, March is when we release the new vintage of your wine to our market. So I'm conscious I make you talk a lot, but do you mind telling us a few words about 2019? There's going to come out sometime next week. 2019
is still in barrels, Thibault.
Yes, but we are going to put it in the market. I mean, it's at the winery, and then it will be in our customers' reserve, and then in Singapore a little later. But the offer is going to be 2019. Okay.
2019 is a vintage which is also, I think, a very nice style of vintage that I would recommend to own, because it comes after 18, which is a very exuberant vintage, very lovely, very lively, also very enjoyable, very joyous 18 was. 19 has for it that it has more acidity than 18, and therefore the tension of the wine is, I think, a little bit preferable maybe in 19 than it was in 18. There is more, the backbone is a little bit more firm, if you will, due to this acidity. And there's a lot of elegance also in that particular vintage 19. Lovely aromatics, length, and also the tannins are very well integrated. And there's one thing which is always a very crucial point, which is the fact that each terroir actually speaks very clearly for itself, and you can recognize the terroirs very well. So there's not, the vintage or the season has not overwhelmed the soil and subsoil, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a great vintage. You know, often people say, "What does it remind you of?" and blah blah blah. And my comment was, you know, once again we have a vintage with ending with a 9 that is a great vintage. It's kind of a silly statistic, you know, because obviously there's nothing behind it, but it's a fact that vintages in 9 have proved to be usually great vintages. You know, 1909 was a great vintage, 99 was a great vintage, 89, 79, 69, 59, 49, all these vintages are great vintages. Perhaps 89 and 79 a little below the others, but nonetheless, overall, a great 69.
And 17 question around. Would you to what other vintage would you compare 17? You know, for the whites it could be 14, but for the reds would you say also 14 or some other vintages?
Yeah, it has elements of 14 for sure, but it has also elements probably of 7, because, you know, 2007, 2000, yeah, you know, there's in 17 what I like very much, and I must say I enjoy the champagne. I hope they traveled well, because my bottle here is really looking good. In 17 you have that combination of elegance and tenderness and vitality, or whatever you want to call it, kind of young dog. Sometimes I say, you know, the wine seems to be moving in the glass, and yet it's tender and it's elegant. And so there is element of tenderness in vintage 2007 as well. But there is also, in that particular 17, there is some memory of 14, of 11, closer to that style of vintage than to the warm vintages like 15 we talked about, or even 9 that we talked about as well, which is more solar than this.
And from what you've seen of 2020 so far, could you also say that the vintage of decades finishing by 0 are also very good vintages?
You know, about 20, and in fact I could say that about 19 and 18 to a large extent. One of the things which is very important, you know, is that you have to understand that the climate change is really a huge event. Yeah, and initially, at least for us in Burgundy, it's been, I must admit, quite good, because we harvest completely fully ripe grapes, which was not the case a generation ago. You know, a generation ago, we would harvest a month later than today, but we would harvest berries that we would need to chaptalize in order to get the right level of alcohol. And today, you know, I don't remember last time I used sugar to chaptalize. I've never done it. I don't need it. And so we harvest absolutely ripe grapes, and that's a wonderful thing. Yet it has to be scary, because you have to worry that the Pinot Noir maybe will not adjust to the new scheme of things with the very warm weather and dry weather. Yet 18, 19, 20, 3 vintages where Pinot Noir actually shows, you know, in 18, 20, 19, the same. You cannot not say that these are particularly Pinot Noir style vintages. They are Pinot Noir style vintages. And in fact, they do not feel solar when you taste them. And that's a wonderful thing. And I happen to believe that there are 2 explanations to this. and I'm hoping I'm right. At the moment, it's a speculation. But I would argue two things. One is that the plant has already adjusted. The plant has understood that there is more sun, there's less water, and it needs to find other ways to remain what it is. And, maybe go deeper, maybe whatever. But that's point one. And point two, in fact, the vegetative cycle, do you understand? From flowering to harvest, that vegetative cycle actually has narrowed, has shortened. And therefore, the impact of the warm weather and the dry weather is on a shorter period of time. And it's not insignificant. Huh? We used to say 90 days, 100 days between flower and harvest. Now we're at 90 days. It's 10% less. It's not small. It's not a couple of days. In the recent vintages, we have had around 90 days between flowering and harvest. So I'm hoping that, and you will see, that's a long answer to your short question about 2020, but you will see 2020 will be a very classic vintage, very classic Burgundy vintage. And that's a huge victory, a huge relief for all of us that want Burgundy to be around in 1,000 years from now. You and I will not. But
these are good news. I mean, and it's a fantastic way to finish the session with you this evening. You started with talking about the 5 vintages prior to 2017 that were quite grim and gloomy, and now an hour later, having tasting the 4 fantastic wines that we were talking about today, and you're telling us that the latest vintages, at least 18, 19, 20, are positive, and they are, I know, some of them in quantity where everybody will be able to enjoy the wine. So at the end, like in a true good movie, good things end up well. We all like happy ending, don't we?
We do, absolutely, we do.